Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, here with some comments following the victory of Antonio Tarver over Danny Green earlier this morning. If you're a gambler and you followed my recommended play on this fight, you're scratching your head. The fight certainly did not go the way I thought it would go. I was expecting Green to successfully defend his title against a 42-year-old Antonio Tarver. But the under 10.5 straddle held. It was a plus 200. We'll take that to cut losses to hedge risk, right? For those of you who don't know, at the end of the 9th round, apparently Danny Green's corner had seen enough and threw in the towel. So that formally goes into the books as a stoppage, and the under 10.5 rounds at plus 200 actually hit on that fight. Let's talk about its impact on boxing. I think it's huge. I believe it opens the door for a current fighter to possibly establish himself as arguably the best of his generation. Keep in mind that Antonio Tarver fought and lost to light heavyweight champion Bernard Hopkins. The fight was not close. The fight has spawned folklore. Antonio Tarver had just made a movie with Sylvester Stallone. Tarver had to lose weight to defend his title. He was then the light heavyweight champion. He had to lose weight to defend his title. And if you believe Antonio Tarver, he was just a dead man walking on that night. He just couldn't do what he needed to do in the ring against Bernard Hopkins. Now, if you watch the fight's striking because Bernard Hopkins in that fight fights an entirely different fight than he would later fight against Roy Jones and Jean Pascal. In that fight, believe it or not, Bernard Hopkins uses mobility, foot speed, to disarm Antonio Tarver. He doesn't spend a lot of time rushing in on Tarver. Rather, what he's doing is he's moving around the ring, not allowing Tarver, who's the consummate counterpuncher himself, to set his feet. Now, my point to you is simply this, and I'm not a boxing manager, I'm just a fan and a gambler. My point to you is this. Chad Dawson, who is Bernard Hopkins' next opponent, is simply too dangerous. There's too much risk for a guy in his mid-40s. Keep in mind, Chad Dawson has beaten Antonio Tarver. Let's go further. Chad Dawson, quite frankly, has beaten Tomas Ademic. Right? Dawson is a unique talent who is not that popular. The public hasn't taken to Dawson and doesn't seem to appreciate the talent level, and it's very high. So my point is simply this. If you're a champion in your mid-40s, why would you want to fight Dawson? Because that's like climbing Mount Everest, only no one knows it's Mount Everest. You gain very little for the accomplishment. At this point, if I'm Bernard Hopkins, I'm thinking about adding additional challenges and accomplishments to my resume. I'm not thinking about winning fights that are the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest in the middle of the night. Now, HBO apparently sat down with Chad Dawson and Bernard Hopkins, and HBO concluded that they didn't have the money, if you could believe this one, to pay for the fight to have it on HBO. So that fight is a pay-per-view disaster waiting to happen. It's on HBO pay-per-view. I think very few people are going to buy it. Chad Dawson has never established a strong presence on pay-per-view. So what I'm going to recommend is going to be ridiculous. I'm just throwing it out there because it's come to my attention that a few people in boxing, some boxing managers watch my videos, some fighters watch my videos. What I'm going to throw out there is to encourage Bernard Hopkins to leave the light heavyweight division. This is your chance at even greater greatness, right? Hopkins, of course, is already a first ballot Hall of Famer. And I want Bernard Hopkins to entertain the thought of a rematch, and I believe this would certainly make, premium television, HBO, Showtime. This is an obvious, easy sell. Why not give Antonio Tarver a rematch, only this time for the cruiserweight title, a title Bernard Hopkins has never held. Right? Keep in mind, Bernard has been the middleweight champion. He's been the light heavyweight champion. I think it would be a huge feather in his cap if he became the cruiserweight champion. Win, lose, or draw, that would be an epic fight between two future Hall of Famers, and certainly Antonio Tarver is a future Hall of Famer after he now has annexed the cruiserweight title to go with his other titles, right? I think a Tarver-Hopkins matchup for the cruiserweight belt would be epic, and I think it would be an excellent style matchup, right? Certainly Tarver seems to be much more vibrant at cruiser, given the dominance of his performance over Danny Green. He even has punching power that, in my opinion, he didn't have at light heavy. He seems to just adjust to cruiser better than light heavy. I think he would be a better man on fight night. And, of course, Bernard Hopkins has already traveled this road against Antonio Tarver. He, too, would certainly have an opportunity to win the fight. Here's the kicker. Earlier I made a video, it got laughed at. It's okay, I've been laughed at before, where I talked about how I thought Bernard Hopkins would actually have a chance at heavyweight against David Haye, right? Haye was then the heavyweight champion of the world with the Klitschkos, right? Well, my point to you is simply this. Close your eyes and think for a second. How many people in boxing fight better inside than Bernard Hopkins? Right? How many people in boxing move well enough against the guy with the long jab where they can literally circle the guy for the entire fight and make him pay inside, like Bernard Hopkins did against Kelly Pavlik, who is tall and who is an excellent jabber? Now ask yourself this question. What could David Haye have done against heavyweight champion Vladimir Klitschko to have made that fight more interesting? If your answer is that David Haye could have made that fight more interesting by fighting like Bernard Hopkins did against Kelly Pavlik, then I just have to say, two fights, right? It's July of 2011. If Bernard Hopkins beats Antonio Tarver to become the cruiserweight titleist, why is it such a reach to consider the idea that Hopkins' skill set, especially his ability to get inside, especially his ability to neutralize guys with good jabs, whether that's Pavlik, whether that's Antonio Tarver, why is it a reach to believe that Bernard Hopkins wouldn't be at least as competitive against Vladimir Klitschko as was David Haye? Right? The difference is Hopkins wouldn't be fighting that fight from the outside in like Haye did. The point is Hopkins would be fighting the fight from the inside out. And all I'm saying is this, and I know Vladimir Klitschko is one of those special names in boxing, right? He's boxing royalty. If I mispronounce his name, I get 10 emails telling me I'm being unfair to Vladimir Klitschko. My point to you is this. If you can get under Vladimir Klitschko's jab, he has shown in multiple fights that he has problems, right? He's a jab and grabber. If you're fluid inside and can avoid being jabbed inside, and if you can bounce to the side like Bernard Hopkins did against Kelly Pavlik, please, somebody here online tell me why that fight strategy wouldn't work against Vladimir Klitschko. Keep in mind, you don't have to knock out the heavyweight champion to take his title. All you have to do is systematically outbox him. Why is no one considering the fact that inside arm reach, Bernard Hopkins is a vastly superior fighter to Vladimir Klitschko. Klitschko doesn't even throw body punches, folks, most of the time. Please don't send me a 10-second clip from a fight where he throws a left hook to the body. My point to you is we all know Vladimir Klitschko is a headhunter. A smaller guy with greater mobility inside on Vladimir Klitschko, in my opinion, would completely confound him. Let's take this one step further. You know that 2 fights ago, Antonio Tarver fought at heavyweight, right? Tarver was over 220 pounds in that fight. I believe, in fact, some reports had him at greater than 230 pounds the night of the fight. Now, given that Corey Sanders, a southpaw, dispatched Vladimir Klitschko, and keep in mind, we're trying to get outside the box because the Klitschkos right now have a stranglehold on the heavyweight division. Given that Tarver can gain weight, can literally weigh, more than David Haye weighed against Vladimir Klitschko, and given that Tarver, as the people in Australia know this morning, is a very slick craftsman in addition to being a southpaw, and given that Tarver himself inside is better than Vladimir Klitschko, why aren't we talking about the possibility of Antonio Tarver jumping up to fight Vladimir Klitschko? Let's make it interesting. We have to think outside the box. Keep in mind, too, for people who don't know, both Bernard Hopkins and Antonio Tarver are tall men. Even though Hopkins was a middleweight, he's a 6-footer, right? Keep in mind, Antonio Tarver is 6'2". David Haye was 6'3", right? My point is simply, if Vladimir Klitschko has already lost to a southpaw in Corey Sanders, and in that fight looked like he wasn't prepared to deal with the southpaw inside, why aren't we considering having a boxing Hall of Famer, a guy who has belts in multiple divisions, who just dispatched a reigning cruiserweight champion? Why aren't we talking about having him in against Vladimir Klitschko? Because what you need to be competitive with the Klitschko is you need to be a craftsman. You need to have skills to offset their physical dominance, right? These guys are taller than everyone else. Vladimir Klitschko is one of the best athletes, quite frankly, in the sport. What he's not, though, is one of the best inside fighters. What you need is a vet who can roll with punches, who can get inside, who can find a way to play angles, and who has a history of beating long jabbers. You have exactly that with Bernard Hopkins. Quite frankly, I think the winner of a Hopkins-Tarver fight should then call out Vladimir Klitschko and should try to arrange for that fight to happen next year. What I don't want is to have to sit through another Vladimir Klitschko snooze fest. Let's at least have a guy in there who knows how to fight inside, who can push the issue, right? I hope we all think about it. I'd like to see Hopkins against Tarver. I'd like to see the winner take on Vladimir Klitschko. I think the sport would be a lot better off. Let me know what you think.